I still remember that afternoon, the kind of quiet that presses gently against your skin, like a secret you're almost afraid to speak aloud. The light in her kitchen was soft, filtered through lace curtains that trembled just a little in the breeze. I was leaning against the counter, watching her move around. Something about the way her hands caught the light made everything else blur. She didn't look my way, but I caught her glance out of the corner of my eye. A slow blink, a breath held just a fraction too long. That's when I realized she wasn't just older, she carried stories in her posture, in the slight crease between her brows. Beautiful, sure, but not the kind of beauty that screams for attention. It was quieter, more complicated. Like a painting you can't stop studying because you sense there's something behind the surface, something she won't say. I'm 23. Not exactly a kid, but not much older either. I'm the kind of guy who notices details no one else does, the way a smile falters just before it forms, or how someone's voice dips a little when they're trying to hide something. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to her. Because she's the opposite of easy to read. There's a guardedness to her, like she's waiting for permission to let her walls fall, but maybe she's forgotten how. We met a few weeks ago, really by accident. I was supposed to just drop by my friend's place to pick up a book, but she was there instead. She smiled when she saw me, that small, almost hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I remember feeling like the air had thickened between us, nothing said, but everything shifting. That day, I caught her brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, fingers trembling just a little. She laughed softly at something I said, but there was a pause, as if she was pulling back a piece of herself she wasn't ready to give. I wanted to ask her what she wanted, really wanted, but the words stuck somewhere in my throat. She moves differently than other women my age, or even those I've known before. There's a grace, yes, but also a weight. Like she's been carrying something around for so long it's become part of her silhouette. When she looked at me, I felt both invisible and completely exposed. It was confusing, thrilling, and a little terrifying. One afternoon, I stayed longer than I probably should have. The sun was dipping low, and the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She was standing by the window, looking out but not really seeing. I was across the room, pretending to fiddle with my phone, but really watching her. Then, without turning, she said, "What I want isn't what I should want." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it filled the space between us. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask her to explain, to pull her closer and find out what she meant. But something held me back, a quiet respect, maybe, or the fear of breaking whatever fragile peace we'd found. She lingered in the doorway longer than she needed to, and I felt the pulse of something unspoken, thick enough to taste. I wanted to reach out, but my hand stayed at my side, trembling without reason. So I just said, "Maybe what you want isn't as wrong as you think." She turned then, that guarded look softening for a moment. And I swear, in that split second, the whole room held its breath. She didn't answer right away, just folded her arms and leaned against the frame of the door like it was the only thing steady in the room. The way she looked at me, half amused, half tired, felt like she was weighing the risk, the impossible between us. The age, sure. 23 and 45 something. But it wasn't just numbers. It was the space between who we were expected to be and who we really were. She said, "It's complicated." Then something like a sigh escaped, soft but heavy. I wanted to ask her to explain, to peel back the layers, but the words got stuck, tangled up in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, pretending the silence was easy, but inside, everything twisted. There was a long pause, the kind that hums louder than words. Then she moved over to the counter, picked up a mug with hands that trembled just enough to betray her calm. "I'm used to being careful," she said, voice low, like confessing a secret. "Careful about who I let close, and who I don't." I watched the way her fingers lingered on the cup, tracing invisible lines. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to be careful with me, but even as I thought it, I knew I didn't fully believe it myself. I told her about my last relationship, in fragments, how it ended without explanation, like a door slamming in an empty hallway. I didn't say how that left me feeling unworthy, like I was always waiting for something to break. She listened, really listened, eyes never leaving mine. For a moment, the air between us shifted. It was quiet, but I swear I felt a bridge forming. She smiled then, small and a little crooked, and it caught me off guard. "You're braver than you think," she said softly. The words landed like a feather, but my heart thudded. Maybe it was too much, too sudden, but I reached out to steady the mug she'd nearly dropped. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, but that flicker stayed, electric and raw. We laughed, awkwardly, as if to break the spell. But the room didn't feel lighter. If anything, it grew heavier. She glanced toward the window, eyes distant. "Sometimes what we want, it scares us more than it excites us." I wanted to ask what she meant. To cross that line. But all I did was look at her, really look, and wonder if she was as scared as I was. And maybe that was the real risk, not just what the world would say, but what we might lose if we tried. She shifted in place, the silence folding back in, thicker this time. Then she said, almost like a question, "Are you ready for that?" I couldn't answer. Not yet. The room was dim, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across her face. She was closer than before, too close, maybe, but neither of us moved to change the distance. My heart was thudding loud enough I was sure she could hear it, but she kept her eyes fixed on the floor, like trying to will the moment away. Her hand brushed against mine while she reached for the same book, fingers lingering a second too long. The silence swelled, thick and electric. I caught my breath, caught her glance, and something unspoken passed between us, a question, a dare, maybe a promise. We both knew it was dangerous. She swallowed, biting her lip, eyes darting away as if that would dissolve the tension. I was desperate to say something, anything, but the words caught and scattered. Just then, her phone buzzed sharply against the wooden table. She jumped, startled, and pulled back as if snapped by the sound. "It's my husband," she said, voice low, eyes quickly masking the hesitation. I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. The moment broke, but the space between us didn't. If anything, it felt heavier, like the air was holding its breath, waiting for a choice either of us was ready to make. She moved toward the door, hand on the knob, then paused. Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying the calm she tried to wear like armor. I saw the conflict flicker in her eyes, longing tangled with guilt, and I wondered if she hated me or herself more for this. "I should go," she whispered, voice barely more than a breath. I wanted to stop her. To say, "Stay." But I only managed, "Okay." The door clicked softly behind her. I sank back against the counter, the silence pressing down harder than before. My fingers twitched where hers had been just moments ago. I knew I shouldn't be feeling this, but I was. The air was thick, heavier than it had been all evening. The soft hum of the city outside felt miles away from the cramped quiet of the kitchen where we stood, too close, too far. She was staring at me like I was some puzzle she couldn't solve, or maybe didn't want to. My hands itched to reach out, but every time I tried, doubt slammed into me like a wall. This wasn't just a moment, it was the moment where everything could break. Or start. She took a shaky breath, lips pressed tight, eyes dark with something I couldn't name. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "I'm tired of pretending this isn't happening." Her voice cracked, raw and trembling like she'd been holding it inside for years. My heart clenched, and suddenly all the careful walls I'd built started crumbling. Before I could stop myself, my hand found hers, firm, desperate, and I pulled her closer. The space between us vanished. Her breath itched, her eyes fluttered shut, and I knew this wasn't just a touch anymore. She bit her lip, trembling, and whispered, "I shouldn't be here." "I don't care," I said, voice rough. The words felt reckless the second I said them. But it was like something inside me snapped free, like I couldn't hold it back any longer. I wanted to lean in, to close the last inch between us, but just then, her phone buzzed again. She pulled away, guilt and confusion flashing across her face. "Don't!" She started, voice barely audible. I reached out, fingers brushing her cheek, and she stopped, frozen. Don't go, I whispered, breath shaky. Her eyes opened slowly, searching mine, and for a heartbeat, everything was still, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then she leaned in. And just before our lips met, the doorbell rang sharply, slicing through the fragile silence. She jerked back, eyes wide, heart pounding. The moment shattered, leaving us both gasping for air, suspended on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. Her lips lingered against mine for a breath that felt infinite, soft, hesitant, like she was testing the edges of something she'd buried deep. Then, without warning, she pulled back, eyes wide and searching, like she was suddenly seeing me in a way that scared her. I can't, she said, voice barely a whisper, trembling. Not like this. I wanted to argue, to reach for her again, but the weight in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't just guilt. It was something older, fear maybe. Or the remnants of a promise she'd made a long time ago. She stepped back, putting distance between us that wasn't just about space. I'm not free, she said, voice cracking. There are things you don't know. Things I can't undo. I blinked, trying to swallow the sudden twist, but she didn't wait for me to ask. My husband, she said quietly. He's not the man you think he is. I'm trapped in a life that looks perfect but isn't. I never wanted you to get caught in that. The room felt colder, the light dimmer. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the fractures beneath the surface, the hesitation in every movement. I'm leaving, I said, voice low. Tomorrow morning. She didn't say anything, just stared, eyes unreadable. I wanted to tell her to fight, to choose, but the silence stretched between us, thick and unyielding. We stood there, two people caught in a moment that neither could fix. Her fingers twitched at her side, like she wanted to reach out but stopped herself. Maybe some things aren't meant to be, she said finally, voice soft but distant. I swallowed hard, feeling the ache of what we almost had, and what we were about to lose. As I turned toward the door, I glanced back once. She was still there, framed by the fading light, a figure caught between hope and surrender. Neither of us said goodbye. But the question hung there, heavier than words. Were we walking away? Or just running out of time? The door clicked shut behind me, but I didn't move away. Instead, I stayed rooted in the kitchen's fading light, eyes fixed on her. There was something raw in the air, like every word left unspoken was about to break free. She looked at me, breath uneven, fingers curled like she was holding herself together. Then, finally, she spoke, voice trembling but fierce. I want you, she said. I do. But I don't know how this can work. Her honesty hit me like a wave, no masks, no excuses, just the truth spilling out in fragments. I wanted to tell her it could work, that we could find a way. But the silence between us was thick with all the things we'd been avoiding, the age, the promises, the past wounds. I'm scared, she admitted, eyes searching mine for something, hope, forgiveness, or maybe just a sign I'd stay. I'm scared too, I whispered. But maybe that's the point. We both knew this wasn't about easy answers or perfect timing. It was about two flawed people standing on the edge of something that could either save or destroy them. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then flicked back up with a fragile, tentative light. I don't want to lose myself again. Not like before. I don't want that either, I said, stepping closer, careful not to rush the moment. She reached out, fingertips brushing my arm, light, almost hesitant. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. A crack in the walls we built around our fears. We stood there, the silence wrapping around us like a fragile thread, either daring to pull away. And maybe for the first time, the question wasn't about what could go wrong, but what might just be worth fighting for. Her eyes held mine longer than before, a mix of hope and uncertainty dancing there. Then she said, almost like an invitation, "Stay." The word hung between us, heavy and alive. I didn't answer. Not yet. But the door wasn't closed. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of 2 coffee cups, steam curling upward like a slow dance. She sat across from me, fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic, her eyes meeting mine with a calm I hadn't seen before. It wasn't perfect, nothing about us was, but the heaviness had lifted, replaced by a quiet understanding. The regrets and fears weren't gone, they'd simply found their place beside hope. She smiled then, small and real, and I felt the weight in my chest ease. "Thank you for staying," she said softly, her hand reaching out to cover mine. The touch was tentative but sure, like the start of something fragile and beautiful. I squeezed her fingers gently, feeling the warmth spread, not just in my hand but deep inside. We sat together like that for a while, letting the silence fill the space with something gentle, a promise not made with words, but with presence. There was no rush. No grand declarations. Just two people who'd risked everything and found each other in the quiet moments in between. As the morning light shifted through the window, I realized that sometimes love wasn't about sweeping gestures or perfect timing. It was about choosing to stay, even when the path was uncertain. And today, we chose each other.